The woman threw the coffee at me at Gate B34 of Denver International Airport on the morning of Sunday, October 5th at 6:47 a.m. She was in her early 50s. She was wearing a cream-colored travel sweater and a large gold necklace. She had, 30 seconds earlier, been standing in front of me in the pre-boarding line for Delta Flight 2247 to Atlanta. She had, 20 seconds earlier, turned around and asked me, in a voice loud enough for the entire gate area to hear, whether I really thought I deserved to board before the paying customers. I was wearing my Air Force dress blues. I was 38 years old. I was carrying a small, hard-sided Pelican case that contained the folded American flag that had, 72 hours earlier, been draped over my brother's coffin. I did not respond to her. She threw the coffee. It was a large Starbucks Grande. It was still hot. It hit the front of my jacket, my ribbons, my name tag, and the top of the Pelican case in my left hand. The coffee soaked into the wool of the jacket immediately. The gate area went silent. I stood there for exactly 3 seconds, holding the Pelican case, coffee running down my ribbons. Then I heard a voice from behind the Delta gate counter say, very quietly, into a radio, 3 words that changed the next 4 hours of my life. The voice said, "Send them now." The brother, my name is Captain Elena Rodriguez. I am 38 years old. I am a chaplain in the United States Air Force. I have served for 11 years, most of it at Air Force bases in the western United States. I am, on paper, one of about 300 Catholic chaplains in the Air Force. My role is to provide spiritual and pastoral support to airmen and their families, at baptisms, at weddings, at deployments, and, most often, at funerals. I want to tell you about my brother, because you cannot understand what happened at Gate B34 without understanding why I was in that uniform, on that flight, at that hour, carrying that Pelican case. My brother's name was Master Sergeant Miguel Rodriguez. He was 35 years old. He was a combat rescue officer, a pararescue jumper in the Air Force, one of the small elite units whose job is to rescue downed pilots and wounded personnel in combat zones. He had served for 15 years. He had deployed 9 times. He died on the morning of Wednesday, October 1st, at a small forward operating base in a country I am not going to name on this recording. He died during a training accident, a rope failure during a helicopter fast rope exercise. He fell 48 feet. He was pronounced dead at the scene by the flight surgeon, who had, ironically, been one of the men my brother had rescued in Afghanistan in 2019. I was notified at my base in Colorado at 8:14 p.m., Mountain Time on Wednesday evening. I was notified by a casualty notification officer, a Navy lieutenant commander from Peterson Space Force Base, who arrived at my house with a chaplain from the Denver Archdiocese because the Air Force had, when they made the notification arrangements, understood that the primary next of kin was, herself, a Catholic chaplain. The chaplain who came to my door was Father Michael Grady. He had been a good friend for 6 years. He said, when I opened the door and saw him standing next to the notification officer, "Elena, it's Miguel?" I said, "Father, when?" He said, "This morning? In country. I'm so sorry." I did not at that moment cry. I did not cry for another 2 days. What I did instead, and this is important for the story, was I asked the notification officer 3 questions. I asked, "Where is he now?" The officer said, "Dover, Air Force Mortuary Affairs. He'll be dignified transfer tomorrow morning." I asked, "When can I bring him home?" The officer said, "Ma'am, that depends on the family. The military will transport him to any airport in the continental United States. Our recommendation is Atlanta, if the family is planning burial at the Georgia National Cemetery, since that is what your brother's DD-93 form specified." I asked, "Who is escorting him?" The officer said, "Ma'am, that is your decision. Standard practice would be a fellow pararescueman from his unit, but you are, per his DD-93, his primary next of kin, and you are yourself active duty military. If you wish to serve as the family escort, you may." I said, "I wish to serve as the family escort." The officer said, "Ma'am, I understand. I'll coordinate with Dover." That was on Wednesday night. I flew from Denver to Dover, Delaware, on Thursday morning. I was present at the dignified transfer of my brother's remains from the C-17 aircraft. I stood on the tarmac at Dover Air Force Base at 6:20 a.m. Eastern Time, in my dress blues, and I saluted my brother's flag-draped transfer case as it came down the ramp of that airplane. I traveled with his remains to the Air Force Mortuary Affairs Operations Center. I was present, in the room with a small team of morticians and one Air Force chaplain, when they prepared his uniform for the burial. I flew, with his remains, from Dover to Atlanta on Saturday morning. The military transported his body in the cargo hold of a Delta commercial flight. This is the standard procedure for fallen service members, called Military Honors Transport. A military honor guard team met the aircraft at Atlanta and transported his body to a funeral home in Marietta, Georgia, where our family was gathering. The funeral was set for Monday, October 6th, at 11 a.m., at Georgia National Cemetery in Canton, Georgia. I flew to Colorado on Saturday afternoon to retrieve one item from my base office that I had, in the emotional chaos of the previous 3 days, forgotten. A personal breviary my brother had given me at my ordination in 2017. I wanted to read from it at the funeral. I flew back to Atlanta on Sunday morning, October 5th, on Delta Flight 2247. That is the flight I was boarding at Gate B34. I want to tell you about the Pelican case. The Pelican case in my left hand was small, approximately 12 inches by 12 inches by 4 inches, black hard plastic with a foam interior. It contained the American flag that had been draped over the transfer case at Dover, folded into the standard triangular presentation, sealed in a clear archival plastic bag. This flag was, per Air Force protocol, to be presented to my mother at the funeral. My mother is 71 years old. She lives in Marietta. She had, on Wednesday evening, called me while I was still on the phone with the notification officer, and she had said only, "Elena, bring him home, and bring the flag." I had promised her both. The Pelican case, at Gate B34 of Denver International Airport, contained her promise. That is what the woman in the cream sweater threw coffee on. The gate? I want to describe the 6 minutes between when I arrived at Gate B34 and when the woman threw the coffee, because I want you to see her the way I saw her, and to understand why what happened next was not the accident she would later claim it was. I arrived at Gate B34 at 6:41 a.m. I was traveling in uniform. The Air Force officially permits, and in some circumstances encourages, service members to travel in dress uniform when accompanying military honors transport or attending a military funeral. Both applied to me. My flight was scheduled to depart at 7:25 a.m. I was also traveling under what Delta calls military assist boarding, a program that allows uniformed service members traveling on official military business to pre-board the aircraft. I had checked in with the gate agent, a young man named Dylan, at 6:33 a.m. Dylan had looked at my orders, looked at my ID, and quietly upgraded me from my originally booked economy seat to seat 2C in first class. He had said, "Ma'am, thank you for your service, and I'm sorry for your loss." He had, apparently, been briefed by the Delta operations team on the nature of my travel. The pre-boarding call went out at 6:44 a.m. Delta's standard pre-boarding sequence is passengers requiring assistance, unaccompanied minors, then active duty military. I stood up. I gathered my belongings, a small carry-on bag, my breviary, and the Pelican case. I walked to the boarding line. There was one person already in the pre-board line ahead of me. She was the woman in the cream sweater. She was a Delta Diamond Medallion, the highest-tier frequent flyer, and had been called to pre-board with the Disability and Military Boarding Group as a courtesy, which is standard practice at Delta hubs. She turned when I stepped into the line behind her. She looked at my uniform. She looked at my ribbons. She looked at my Pelican case. She said, "Excuse me, are you actually boarding right now?" I said, "Yes, ma'am. Under military assist." She said, That's not fair. I paid for my ticket. I earned my diamond status. You people get to board before paying customers?" I said, "Ma'am, Delta's boarding policy." She said, "Don't ma'am me. I know what Delta's policy is. I fly 140,000 miles a year. I know exactly what the policy is. I just think it's ridiculous that just because you're wearing a costume, you get to skip in front of the people who actually pay this airline's bills." She said costume. I did not respond. I looked at Dylan behind the gate counter. Dylan was already picking up the gate phone. He was, I would later learn, calling the Delta operations supervisor. The woman continued. She was, at this point, no longer speaking quietly. She was speaking loudly enough that the passengers seated in the boarding area, about 90 people, were all now watching us. She said, "I mean, do you even fly for a living?" Are you actually going somewhere important? Or is this just a free upgrade? I said, ma'am, I'd rather not discuss my travel. She said, oh, you'd rather not. That's convenient. Because I have paid over $8,000 in tickets on this airline in the last 12 months. And I'd love to know what makes you so special that you get to board before me. I did not respond. That is when she turned to the boarding area and said, in the voice of a woman making a public appeal, do you all really think it's fair that she gets to board before all of us? The boarding area was silent. Then a man in a hunting jacket, sitting in the third row of the gate seating, said, ma'am, she's carrying a folded flag, in a pelican case. Please stop. The woman looked at him. She looked at me. She looked at the pelican case. She looked at the coffee in her hand. I do not know if what she did next was calculated or reflexive. I will never know. What I know is that she turned back to me, adjusted her grip on the paper cup, and, from a distance of approximately 3 feet, threw the contents of a 20-ounce Starbucks Grande hot coffee at my chest. The coffee hit the wool of my dress blue jacket. It soaked into the ribbons on the left side of my chest. It hit the top of the pelican case in my left hand. It ran down the case and pooled on the carpet at my feet. The pelican case was sealed. The flag inside it was safe. I did not know that yet. I stood there for 3 seconds, just holding the case. Then I heard, from behind the Delta Gate counter, Dylan's voice on the radio. He was speaking quietly, urgently to whoever was on the other end. He said, send them now. 2 things happened simultaneously in the next 15 seconds. The first thing that happened was that the woman in the cream sweater, realizing apparently what she had just done in front of 90 witnesses, began to protest. She said, I didn't mean, she was in my way. The second thing that happened was that 3 uniformed law enforcement officers walked into the gate area from the direction of the concourse. They were not TSA. That is important. TSA officers do not enforce arrests at airport gates. TSA is a screening agency, not a law enforcement agency. The officers who walked into the gate area at 6:48 a.m. were Denver Police Department officers assigned to Denver International Airport's Aviation Division. They were led by a supervisor, a sergeant in his mid-50s, silver hair, blue uniform, with a small American flag pin on his lapel. The sergeant walked directly to me. He said, ma'am, I'm Sergeant Andrew Kessler, Denver Aviation Police. Are you injured? I said, Sergeant, I'm fine. It's just coffee. He looked at the pelican case in my hand. He looked at the coffee running down the front of my uniform. He looked at my name tag. He looked at my ribbons, the ones he could still read under the coffee, including the small Air Force Achievement Medal I had received in 2019 for my chaplaincy work at a squadron in Nevada. He said, very quietly, Chaplain Rodriguez, are you traveling on military honors? I said, yes, Sergeant, my brother. He said, ma'am, I am so sorry. He turned to his 2 officers. He said, escort the passenger in the cream sweater off the aircraft. She is not flying today. She is coming with us. The jetway. I want to explain something, because it is important for the story. Federal law, specifically 49 U.S. Code Section 4644, makes it a federal crime to interfere with, intimidate, or assault a flight crew member. But that is not the statute that applied to the woman in the cream sweater. What applied to her was 49 U.S. Code Section 46503, which criminalizes assault on airport property, and Colorado state law regarding third-degree assault, harassment, and disturbance of the peace. Because the airport in question is under the jurisdiction of Denver Aviation Police, an actual sworn law enforcement agency, staffed by Denver Police Department officers, the response was neither TSA nor federal air marshals. The response was local police. But the woman would, in her later social media posts and in her lawyer's initial statement to the press, describe the response as TSA agents. She would not know the difference. Most people do not. What matters is that at 6:49 a.m., Sergeant Kessler's 2 officers approached the woman in the cream sweater. The woman said, wait, this is ridiculous. Sergeant Kessler said, ma'am, please turn around. Place your hands behind your back. The woman said, I want to speak to your supervisor. Sergeant Kessler said, ma'am, I am the supervisor. Please turn around. The woman turned around. Sergeant Kessler's officers placed her in handcuffs. They did not, as she would later claim, roughly manhandle her. They followed standard arrest procedure. Miranda warning at 6:51 a.m., possession search, escort out of the boarding area. The entire process took approximately 4 minutes. During those 4 minutes, the boarding area was completely silent. The man in the hunting jacket, the one who had asked her to stop, stood up. He walked to the gate counter. He said something to Dylan that I could not hear. Dylan handed him a small piece of paper. The man wrote something on it. He walked over to me. He handed me the piece of paper. He said, "Ma'am, I don't need to know your name. That's my phone number. If you need a witness, for anything, for insurance, for anything at all, you call me. I served 2 tours in Iraq. My brother's at Bragg. What she did in front of me is not going to be what she says it was in her lawyer's statement. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" I said, "Sir, thank you." He said, "God bless you and your family, Chaplain." He went back to his seat. Sergeant Kessler's officers escorted the woman in the cream sweater out of the gate area. She was, at that point, no longer trying to protest. She was crying. She was, per Sergeant Kessler's later report, beginning to appear to understand the gravity of the situation. Sergeant Kessler turned to me. He said, "Chaplain Rodriguez, I need to ask you a few questions for the police report. I would prefer to do it in a private area rather than in the boarding lounge. May I escort you to the Delta Operations Office adjacent to the gate?" I said, "Sergeant, of course." Dylan spoke up. He said, "Sir, may I hold Chaplain Rodriguez's boarding position on the aircraft? The flight is scheduled to close doors at 7:15. Sergeant Kessler looked at his watch. He looked at me. He said, "Chaplain, do you need to make this flight?" I said, "Sergeant, my brother's funeral is tomorrow morning at 11. I need to be in Atlanta tonight to help my mother prepare." Sergeant Kessler said, "Ma'am, you will be on that aircraft. Give me 10 minutes. He escorted me to the Delta Operations Office. I was in the office for 12 minutes. I gave a brief statement. I signed a witness form. Sergeant Kessler took photographs of my uniform and the Pelican case. He offered to have a Denver aviation police officer meet me in Atlanta to take a follow-up statement. I declined, and told him I could give the statement by phone after the funeral. He said, "Chaplain, there is one more thing." He handed me a business card. He said, "Ma'am, my father was a Marine. He died in 1988. I was 17. I want you to know that. And I want you to know that if I never do another thing right in my career, escorting the woman in the cream sweater out of your boarding line this morning was going to be one of the things I did right." I said, "Sergeant, thank you." He said, "Chaplain, it was my honor. Now please, go bring your brother home." At 7:11 a.m., I walked out of the operations office. Dylan was waiting for me at the gate. He had, in the interim, arranged for the Delta cleaning crew to bring me a spare uniform jacket. Delta had, apparently, a small closet of spare crew-adjacent items at Denver, and one of the female pilots on a nearby flight had donated her spare uniform jacket for me to wear over my dress blues while the coffee dried. I did not put on the jacket. I said, "Dylan, thank you, but I'm going to board in the uniform I have. The coffee is going to dry. This is the uniform I'm wearing to my brother's funeral tomorrow." Dylan said, "Ma'am, understood." I walked down the jetway. There were, at that point, approximately 90 passengers in the boarding area still watching. Nobody spoke as I walked past. Nobody said anything, but as I passed the third row of the gate seating, the man in the hunting jacket stood up. He came to attention. He rendered a hand salute. 2 other men in the gate area, one of whom I later learned was a retired Coast Guard officer, and one of whom was a veteran of Vietnam, stood up. They also came to attention. They also saluted. I stopped at the top of the jetway. I set down my carry-on bag. I set down the Pelican case, carefully. I straightened up. I returned the salute. Then I picked up my things and I walked onto the aircraft. The flight was completely full. The 3 men in the aisle immediately behind first class, 3 business travelers in suits, stood up as I passed them and nodded. I took my seat, 2C. I sat down. The captain came on the intercom at 7:16 a.m. He said, "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Michael Sorensen. Welcome aboard Delta Flight 2247, with service to Atlanta. Before we push back from the gate, I want to acknowledge that we have a distinguished passenger with us today. Captain Elena Rodriguez, United States Air Force, is traveling with us to Atlanta on military honors transport. Ladies and gentlemen, my crew and I are honored to have her aboard, and we will do everything we can to make this a smooth and comfortable flight. Chaplain Rodriguez, thank you for your service. And on behalf of Delta Airlines, I am so sorry for your loss." The cabin was silent for approximately 4 seconds. Then applause started, quietly, from the back of the aircraft. Someone stood up, then someone else. By the time we pushed back from gate B34 at 7:19 a.m., the entire cabin was on its feet. I looked out the window. The Rocky Mountains were sunlit in the morning air. I closed my eyes. I said, very quietly, so nobody in the seat next to me, "I'm bringing you home, Miguel." The funeral. And after the flight landed in Atlanta, at 12:47 p.m. Central Time, my mother's brother, Uncle Ray, met me at baggage claim. He is 66 years old. He is a retired firefighter from Marietta. He was also a Marine, from 1978 to 1982. He saw me walking toward him. He saw the coffee stains, dried by then into dark brown patches down the front of my dress blue jacket, across the ribbons, and along the pelican case. He did not ask what had happened. He walked over. He took the pelican case from my hand. He looked at it. He looked at me. He said, "Elenita, come on, let's go see your mama." He drove me to my mother's house. My mother was waiting on the front porch. She stood up when we pulled into the driveway. She saw the coffee on my uniform. She saw the pelican case in Uncle Ray's hand. She walked out to the car. She hugged me. She held me for a very long time. Then she said, "Elenita, bring him inside." The funeral was on Monday, October 6th at 11 a.m. at Georgia National Cemetery. My brother received full military honors. 3 Air Force pararescuemen from his unit served as pallbearers. His pararescue team leader, Master Sergeant James Franklin, delivered the eulogy. I delivered the closing prayer. At the end of the service, my mother sat in the front row. A pararescueman knelt before her. He presented the folded flag from the pelican case, clean, uncoffee-stained, sealed in its archival bag, to her. He said, in the standard presentation, "On behalf of the President of the United States Air Force, and a grateful nation, please accept this flag as a symbol of our appreciation for your loved one's honorable and faithful service." My mother took the flag. She held it against her chest. She looked at me across the small graveside cluster of family. She nodded once. I nodded back. That was 6 months ago. I want to tell you what happened to the woman in the cream sweater. Her name is Vivian Coleman. She is 53 years old. She was, a regional sales director for a medical device company in Denver. Colorado charged her with third-degree assault, disturbance of the peace, and disorderly conduct. Her attorney, understanding the composition of the 90 witnesses, negotiated a plea to a lesser count of harassment with a mandatory community service component and a formal written apology. The written apology was delivered to me through my chain of command in December. I read it once. It was 3 paragraphs. It was, at best, formulaic. I did not respond. Vivian Coleman lost her job at the medical device company on the Tuesday after the incident. Her employer had, apparently, seen the video that the man in the hunting jacket had, unbeknownst to me, been recording on his phone from the moment she asked her second question. The video reached approximately 11 million views on social media before Vivian Coleman's attorneys filed the takedown requests. Delta Airlines banned Vivian Coleman from all Delta flights, indefinitely, on the Wednesday after the incident. Delta wrote me a personal letter. It was signed by their chief operating officer. It offered me, and any member of my family, for the rest of my career, unlimited complimentary domestic first-class travel for military honors purposes. I have not used it, but I have kept the letter. Sergeant Andrew Kessler was promoted to Lieutenant, Denver Aviation Division, in February. He called me the week of his promotion. He said he wanted me to know. I said I was proud of him. He said his father would have been proud of both of us. The man in the hunting jacket, his name is Dale Winter, from Sheridan, Wyoming, is now on my mother's Christmas card list. My mother has met him twice. She has decided he is, in her phrase, one of the good ones. Dylan, the Delta Gate agent, sends me a card every year on my brother's death anniversary. It says the same thing every year. It says, "Chaplain, still thinking of Miguel, D." I keep the cards in a drawer. I still wear the same dress blue uniform. Delta's dry cleaning service, when they returned my uniform 2 weeks after the incident, had successfully removed the coffee stains. But if you look very closely at the ribbon rack, just under the achievement medal, you can see a small, very faint discoloration in the wool. I could have had it replaced. I did not. Because on the morning of Sunday, October 5th at 6:47 a.m., at Gate B34 of Denver International Airport, a woman named Vivian Coleman threw coffee on my uniform. And the men and women who were in that gate area that morning did what strangers sometimes, quietly, still do for each other in this country. They stood up. That is the uniform I want to remember, coffee stain and all. If you have ever been in an airport or a store or a public place and watched someone be treated the way Vivian Coleman treated me, and stood up, or wished you had, I want you to leave one word in the comments below. Just one word, the place where you saw it. The gate, the aisle, the corner, the parking lot. Say the place, because someone in this comment section is going to see your word, and they are going to remember that standing up in public for a stranger costs almost nothing, and matters almost more than we know. And if this story reminded you that the country still, sometimes, quietly, works, subscribe. Because next week, I am telling you about a mother-in-law who handed me a prenup at brunch. Her lawyer refused to look at me. I'll see you there.